to create an episode like this because I realized that, I get the amazing opportunity to sit down with someone, hear their story, the raw parts of it, the difficult parts of it. But I feel like there's so much more to say after. And I imagine parents might be listening to this and go, okay, like, what do we do with all this information? So I had the idea to create just kind of a little follow-up, and so where we could really go deep and reflect on our own experiences and how we can make sense of some of this stuff and some of these harder topics that are tricky and complex and also unique to everyone's journey. I think a lot of people will find connection in her story, even if you haven't walked through a similar path. I interviewed Ellen as a friend, but I also had my clinical hat on, and I also was listening from my own vantage point of like my own upbringing and my own journey. I was also listening as a parent. I'm just so honored to be able to hear people's stories and also to be able to share them on the podcast because I hear from you guys and this stuff matters. It impacts you. And so I'm just so proud of everyone who's brave enough to share their story. Parents might be listening to this story with that tight feeling in their chest, like replaying moments in their head with their own kids. And then if you're a teen listening, you might be thinking, this sounds familiar in a way that I don't really have words for. Let's make sense of what it shows us about anxiety, control, the body, and why some kids struggle quietly for a long time before anyone realizes how much they're holding. I want to start with the part of Ellen's story that I think is most often misunderstood. For many teens, especially girls, anxiety doesn't show up as like panic, right? It often shows up as control. And it makes sense because control can feel grounding, predictable, reassuring. When the world feels overwhelming, control can feel like the only thing that steadies you. And let's be honest, for our teenagers, the world is overwhelming. So for a lot of teens, the body becomes this place where that control lives. It's a place where they can have ownership and autonomy, or at least they think. This is why eating disorders are often misunderstood. They're not always about wanting to necessarily look a certain way. Maybe it starts like that, but it can also just be wanting relief. When Ellen talked about the rules, the math, and the pressure around food, it's really important to understand where that began. Those calculations didn't start with body image per se. They started with her type 1 diabetes diagnosis. From that point on, food was not neutral anymore. It required math, monitoring, precision, numbers. Everything mattered, and mistakes didn't just feel uncomfortable. They were risky. She was in the ICU for 4 days. So that's how food can sometimes become rigid or anxiety-driven, not necessarily a vanity reason. It can be a nervous system that learned early on that control was how you stayed safe. This matters because adolescents with type 1 diabetes are at a significantly higher risk for disordered eating behaviors than their peers. Not because of appearance, but because their bodies and foods are already medicalized. When your body already feels unpredictable, I think Ellen described it as like her body was shutting down, it was turning on her, controlling food can start to feel like survival. If you're a parent listening, you might want to ask yourself, when my child feels overwhelmed, where do I see them trying to regain control? What behaviors seem to help them feel more contained or predictable? And also, you can think about that from your own perspective, not just from what your kid does. One of the most important questions we can ask isn't, why would someone do this? It's, how is this behavior helping them? Eating disorders often give people a sense of agency when everything else feels overwhelming. They create structure when emotions feel messy. They offer relief when anxiety is loud. They give a sense of control when the body itself feels untrustworthy. This makes the behavior make a little bit more sense. Especially if you're someone who doesn't really have any experience with this, it can feel really confusing. And research shows that more than 70% of people with eating disorders also meet criteria for an anxiety disorder. The overlap matters because it tells us this is not just about appearance. It's about regulation. Parents, you can pause here and reflect. What might my child be getting from this that I haven't been seeing yet? What need might this behavior be meeting, even if it comes at a cost? Again, when we're curious, we come at it from a different angle, a more regulated balanced perspective. Okay, so comparison plays a role here too, especially for young women. But comparison isn't about being shallow or insecure, although I think we can all admit, as Ellen and I both joked, who hasn't had a stint with this? It's about safety. The brain is constantly scanning for reassurance. Am I okay? Am I doing this right? Do I belong? At first, comparison can feel motivating. It gives direction. It offers rules. But over time, it can become punishing. It can even become dangerous. I would love you to ask yourself, when you were a teenager, how did you measure your worth? Do you feel like it's different than what your teenager is facing now? What messages did you internalize about discipline, success, or being enough? Our own histories matter more than we think. This is often where parents start to feel blindsided. I've heard parents say, "But she seems okay," or "Why didn't she tell us?" Hiding usually isn't about lying. It's about fear. Fear of losing independence, fear of being watched more closely, fear of disappointing the people you love. I think all of that came up for Ellen. She had parents that were active and engaged and wanting to help her, and she knew that if she were fully honest with them, she might lose independence. She might feel like she was disappointing them. A teen can look calm and still be struggling deeply. Holy moly, I see that all the time. It's the kids that we think are fine that are not okay. And high functioning does not mean that someone is doing well. From a family systems perspective, this matters. When parents get scared, they often move toward control. I mean, we're talking about the same thing. They ask more questions, they monitor more closely, they speak with more urgency. And when control increases, teens often pull inward and away. Hear me when I say this. Both sides are trying to feel safe. Both parents and teens are trying to feel safe. They're just using different strategies. If you're a parent, ask yourself, how do I usually respond when I'm scared for my child? Do I move toward fixing, controlling, or urgency? I can definitely be guilty of trying to fix things sometimes. Ask my husband. Ellen talked about not going to treatment until she decided she wanted to go. That can be terrifying to hear as a parent. But healing can't be done for someone. It kind of has to come from inside. Now, that doesn't mean parents don't matter. It means their role is different than fixing. And this is hard, guys. Like, I get it. If you're going through something difficult like this, you need to walk through this with a professional. There's just too much at stake, right? And what stood out in Ellen's story wasn't pressure or panic from her parents, although I know that came up because, of course, they're human and terrified. You know, Ellen mentioned it was a really hard time for her family. But her parents, they were steady. They were there. When she was ready, she went to them and she said, "Okay, I'm ready." And they said, "Great." Sometimes that calm is what makes it possible for a teen to choose help for themselves. And treatment, when it happens, it's not a cure. It's containment, right? It creates safety when things feel unmanageable for a period of time. It can bring someone to a place where they can heal. But honestly, the hardest part comes after, which is what Ellen said. When the structure is gone and real life resumes and we run into things like whether insurance is going to cover care, whether there's a great provider, whether there's a specialized provider, if they fit in your time and schedule, all these different things. Recovery isn't getting back to who someone was before. It's about learning how to live without the illusion of control. And this is the hard part. Recovery asks people to feel what they learned to avoid, to listen to their body instead of overriding it, to tolerate uncertainty. Again, all of the things that the eating disorder was covering up for them. And it asks families to do something really hard. Stay connected without managing every outcome. I mean, is that not every parent's worst nightmare? We always want our kids to be okay. If you're a parent listening, what helps most isn't necessarily having the perfect words, because honestly, a lot of times there aren't perfect words. There aren't even words, right? It's being regulated enough to stay through the difficult times. So what helps you stay grounded when your child is struggling? Who supports you so that you don't have to carry this alone? I mean, I gotta do a little plug here. That's why I created my parent support group, because I feel like so often as parents, we are focused on how can I help my child? We forget that we also need support and that we literally can't care for our child if we don't care for ourselves. And no, your calm does not mean you don't care. I'm not just saying, be calm and everything will be okay, but it does mean that you're safe enough to stay present, and they need to hear that. They need to feel that from you. If you're a teen listening, wanting control, doesn't mean you're broken. Going through something hard doesn't mean you're a failure. Lean into the people and places that help you feel safe enough to breathe. That was Ellen's advice, and I think it's really good. Find something that can be your protective factor through this. Most teens who struggle do find their way through, but not maybe in the way that we expected or on the timeline that we wanted, but holding on to this idea that your teen can get through this is a hope that can really change things. If this brought up fear, recognition, familiarity, or even a little relief for you, you're not alone, and this is not the end of the story. Being curious about your child's experience is a great starting point. All of the music on this podcast has been custom created by Ellen, which I am so thankful for. I told her that the free stuff was crap and I needed her expertise. You can follow her on all social media outlets at EllieZelie, ELLIEZELIE. She posts a lot of good music on TikTok. I would give her a follow now. The next couple of years are going to be really big for her. Stay tuned.